In South Asia, land stretches from the Himalayas in the north to the Indian Ocean. It is a region of many peoples, climates, beliefs, and castes. The year is 1927 in India under British rule. One man leads thousands of people for a simple drink of water. The tank, open to all others, even animals, was denied to his people, the untouchables. Beaten for this simple act of defiance, their leader's struggle was just beginning.
Well, he was the leader of all the dispossessed in India.
Dr. Ambedkar's life was very much dedicated to the untouchable, to the poor, and I think that it's tremendous.
He's probably the most highly educated man in Maharashtra, possibly in all of India, and he's an untouchable. And the first college graduate, just an unbelievable story.
If I was asked to confine myself to one word, I would say he was a very heroic figure, a sort of almost a Herculean figure, strong, determined, with a touch of belligerence.
Dr. Bhimrao Ramji Ambedkar led over 60 million people in their fight to receive basic human rights.
His funeral in Bombay, the funeral procession, was the biggest one India has ever known.
Bhimrao Ramji Ambedkar was born in 1891, the youngest child of 14 to a military officer in north-central India. Ambedkar's parents, Ramji and Bhimbai, thought of him as the jewel of the family. Their family belonged to a group of people called the Mahar, who were untouchable. To be untouchable was to live without craft or proper education. These people suffered because they were the lowest of the low. We now go far from India to Minnesota to meet Dr. Eleanor Zeliat, who received her PhD in Ambedkar studies and is the foremost Western scholar on Dr. Ambedkar.
The Mahars were a huge caste found in every village in the area, the Marathi-speaking area, and they had no craft. They did not do leather, they did not clean bathrooms, they did not make ropes. Most untouchable castes have some occupation. The Mahars were village servants. They decreed the boundaries, they took care of the government horses, the government officials' horses. They settled disputes, they carried the holy fire from one village to another. They carried out dead animals, this was their one polluting duty. They obeyed the wishes of the patil, the village headman. They took the treasury of the village to the tax center. They had all kinds of duties which demanded intelligence, but none carried over as occupations into the non-village world. Well, Ambedkar may have been the 14th child, but he clearly was beloved by his father and his mother and encouraged, because the family moved to help him get an education. They moved to Satara, then they moved to Dapodi, and then they moved to Bombay. And this bright youngster managed to do his matriculation from the University of Bombay. This is a very big deal. The only untouchables who'd gotten to this level of education were Christian untouchables from the South who could work through the church. When Ambedkar got his matriculation, a caste Hindu reformer, Krishnaji Kaluskar, gave him his book, which was the life of the Buddha. This is a very mythical legend now in the whole story of Ambedkar. As a young man, he was a child really, a teenager, he was given the life of the Buddha, in Marathi, of course, which he read and appreciated. He went on to school. He went to Elphinstone College. He couldn't study Sanskrit because he was a Mahar, he was an untouchable. He studied Persian, which meant he had perfect Urdu later when he was a political person.
After earning his bachelor's degree, Bhimrao now faced the problem of finding work. His father, with his 50 rupee a month pension, had hoped Bhimrao would get a job in Bombay. Bhimrao was then introduced to the Maharaja of Baroda. The Raja then asked Bhimrao a question. "I would like to send an intelligent young scholar to America for a higher education. Would you like to go?" Bhimrao immediately filled out the application, and the state of Baroda gave him a scholarship for up to 3 years. His departure to America was certain, so Bhimrao took some money in advance from his scholarship and gave it to his brother to care for his family in India. On July 29, 1913, Bhimrao arrived in New York and was admitted to Columbia University.
And Ambedkar went to Columbia. He studied with very important people, chief among them John Dewey, the great rationalist, educationist, humanitarian Democrat.
Bhimrao took up residence at the Cosmopolitan Club, a very international-friendly dorm that included some of his classmates. It was upon reaching America that Bhimrao discovered he had the freedom to study as much as he pleased. He was a man obsessed with study, and pursued it 16 hours a day at libraries where he would be the first through its doors and the last to leave.
He went to Columbia, he got an MA, he got a PhD, economics, that was his field, particularly the rupee and the British behavior. He was very anti-British in his economic studies. Well, Ambedkar was not satisfied with the Columbia PhD, so he got himself to England with the help of yet another non-Brahmin prince, the Maharaja of Kolhapur, Chhatrapati Shahu. And in London, he studied at the London School of Economics. He got his DSc, again on economics, and he passed the bar. Now, this is extraordinary. He's probably the most highly educated man in Maharashtra, possibly in all of India, and he's an untouchable. And the first college graduate, just an unbelievable story. He doesn't write much about those days. We know he struggled. We know he didn't do very much but study. We know that he struggled economically. He didn't have much money.
After finishing his studies in London, Ambedkar returned to Baroda. The scholarship he had taken bound him to work for the government for a number of years. The king wished to make Dr. Ambedkar his finance minister. When the government servants learned who the king wished to make their administrative chief, the response was to offer unlimited insults to Dr. Ambedkar. Even when the lowest ranks would fetch a file for him, they would not enter the room and threw the files at his desk. As his treatment was unbearable, and not finding proper accommodation in the town as an untouchable, he resigned. Dr. Ambedkar refused to be defeated by his failing in Baroda. Returning to Bombay, he spent his spare time looking for a job and used the library to continue his studies. After a great deal of hard and fruitless searching, he finally found employment as a well-paid professor at a government university.
But the real moment of fame came with two instances. One was the Mahad Satyagraha. Mahad is a little town south of Bombay. They had a very pretty little pond in the Brahmin area. They had two other things. They had a very advanced mayor who was determined to fill the law that had just been passed by a reformer that all public places were open to untouchables. So he invited Ambedkar to come to Mahad and sort of have a conference.
Thousands of people, many of them not untouchable, showed up to take part in the conference.
And in the middle of the conference, they decided to test this law and marched to the Mahad tank or pond and drank. And then a rumor spread through the town that they were on their way to the temple.
They were, however, not on the way to the temple. But the rumor spread anyway, and out of their fear, the caste Hindu grabbed batons and other weapons and went to meet the peaceful demonstrators.
They were attacked, beaten up, sent back, and the pond was very ritually purified. Well, they were furious about this, but Ambedkar waited. He didn't immediately take retaliatory action. He waited, and then he called another conference in Mahad, and at that conference, The Manusmriti, the ancient law book that decreed all kinds of punishments for people who challenged the caste system, was burned. I met a school teacher who said Ambedkar had asked him to copy out those parts which were anti-Shudra and anti-woman. Shudra is the fourth caste down, and Touchables are actually below that, but the Manusmriti deals with Shudras. And this school teacher said that he had a Brahmin, Sahasrabudhe, burn those parts of the Manusmritis which were so anti-humanity. At any rate, Mahad became a watchword. But Ambedkar did not go back. He said, we'll fight it in the courts. And eventually the courts came out in Ambedkar's favor. The other thing that made him famous is called the Round Table Conference.
By the 1930s, much of the British political body believed that India should move towards self-governance. To address this, and to hear concern of India's many political parties, the Round Table Conference was held in London. Comprising 3 sessions, in 1930, 1931, and 1932, they were attended by all of India's major political groups. Dr. Ambedkar was invited with all these leaders to provide his insights on the depressed classes.
And Ambedkar held his own. He spoke every time there was an issue that concerned voting, franchise, caste representation.
He spoke passionately. My poor, untouchable brothers live in a condition worse than slaves. Slaves were at least touched by their lords, but our very touch has been deemed a sin. Not even a British government has been able to do anything for us. Formerly, we could not even enter the temples. Even today, we cannot do so. A century and a half of British rule has done nothing to change our condition.
And at this roundtable conference, he came to the decision that there must be separate electorates, i.e., the untouchables must vote as a separate group. Muslims had separate electorates, so why shouldn't untouchables? Well, the British gave this right to untouchables when they finally came out with their roundtable conference findings. And now we bring in Mahatma Gandhi, who had been an advocate for erasing untouchability, but keeping elements of the caste system. Gandhi was incensed. He was crushed. And he decided that he would fast against these separate electorates for untouchables, saying it would make them separate forever. Ambedkar would say, we are separate, why not give us some power and then maybe we can integrate? But Gandhi was firm and he fasted unto death.
Dr. Ambedkar held out as long as he could, but when Gandhi was on the brink of death, he gave in. He feared untouchables would be blamed for Gandhi's death, and many lives would be lost to the anger and tension caused from it.
Separate electorates were canceled, and Ambedkar's followers are still angry about this, but representation was given, assured representation, but with everybody voting. So Ambedkar is a famous person. He is teaching at government law school. He has a tremendous reputation as a constitutional legal scholar. He has a fairly unhappy marital life in that he had terrific losses of his children. I think 3 little boys and 1 little girl died in infancy, and only 1 boy remained alive. Well, 1935 and 1936, another great announcement. He called a conference of Mahars, the only conference he ever called that was not for everybody, strictly for Mahars, and he said, I will not die a Hindu.
Because we have the misfortune of calling ourselves Hindus, we are treated thus. If we were members of another faith, none would dare treat us so. Choose any religion which gives you equality of status and treatment. We shall repair our mistake now. I had the misfortune of being born with the stigma of being an untouchable. However, it is not my fault. But I will not die a Hindu, for this is in my power.
But in 1936, this had a tremendous effect on his people. They were very loyal, and many of them threw out their Hindu gods, even though they didn't know what they were going to do. And Ambedkar built on that to really investigate all religions, Sikhism, Christianity, Islam. He did a lot of searching, but he didn't make any decision. Instead, he turned to politics.
India was on its way to independence, but everything was suddenly drawn to a halt when the Second World War began. The British could not go forward with any self-governance plans because of the war. From 1939 to 1945, India was drawn into the bloody conflict. Dr. Ambedkar continued his fight for untouchable rights and encouraged people to form military units for joining the Allied forces. After the end of the war, India's independence grew nearer. In 1946, an interim government was announced, and the Untouchables, with the help of the Muslim League, gained one seat after the Hindu Congress Party denied them any representation. In August 1947, India and Pakistan were declared independent.
So India, with over 380 million people and 100 creeds, now has two flags flying. One of the Earth's ancient civilizations, her future is beset with strife. On this historic occasion, the first Constituent Assembly is addressed by Prime Minister Pandit Nehru, political leader in the fight for independence. Delirious crowds break through police lines in a near riot that results in minor casualties.
Much thought had gone into determining who would lead India in writing the Constitution. Upon independence, on the recommendation of Gandhi, Nehru asked Dr. Ambedkar if he would join his cabinet as first law minister. 2 weeks later, a committee was appointed to draft India's new constitution under the chairmanship of Dr. Ambedkar. On November 4th, 1948, Dr. Ambedkar presented his draft of the Constitution. In his speech, he stated, "No matter how good a constitution may be, if the means to implement it are not good, then the Constitution proves no better. If we want to establish a democracy, then we must implement our social and economic ideals by means of peaceful and constitutional measures." Democracy's life is based on liberty, equality, and fraternity. There is a total lack of equality in India. We have equality in politics, but inequality reigns in the sphere of society and economics. If we say to ourselves that we are a nation today, it would perhaps be deceiving to ourselves. How can a people divided into thousands of castes and subcastes become one nation? The way to grow strong and united is to remove all such barriers. On November 26th, the Assembly approved the Constitution, and President Dr. Rajendra Prasad said, "We never did a better thing than have Dr. Ambedkar on the drafting committee and select him as its chairman."
It's very clear that he is not the founder, but the architect of the Indian Constitution, making it a secular state, declaring it anti-untouchability, making it possible for later developments to take place. Then the Hindu Code Bill. Hindu because they did not want to try to legislate for Muslims who were allowed different religious practices like 4 wives. He had a terrible time with the Hindu Code Bill. He criticized right, left, and forward. Some people didn't want women to inherit. They didn't want the right of divorce for women. They didn't want the kind of equality that Ambedkar was pushing. And those debates are painful because he was heavily criticized. Toward the end of his attempt to get the Hindu Code Bill passed, Nehru withdrew support. He was for some of the provisions, but he didn't want to take on the whole thing. Ambedkar was crushed. No support from the Prime Minister. He disapproved of India leaning toward the Soviet Union and not for the democratic United States. And in 1951, and also he was ill, that has to be said, he was a diabetic, he resigned, just left the government. Well, those years, 51 to his death in 56, were filled with research, with writing, with visiting Sri Lanka, with visiting Burma, meeting with his people, but also trying to deal with his bad health. He married again. He married a doctor, a woman doctor who was unmarried, and she took care of him.
20 years after the Mahar Conference, Dr. Ambedkar announced plans to embrace Buddhism. India's most senior monk received him into the faith. He asked the 500,000 of his followers seated on the ground at Nagpur to stand and join him in embracing Buddhism. They stood up.
One mustn't forget that the conversion to Buddhism was not just an accident. It was the result of very deep thought, and it was the result of his conviction that religion is of very great importance in human life, and that if you wanted to bring about important social, economic and religious changes, especially in a place like India, it has to be on the basis of religion.
Within 2 months of this event, Dr. Ambedkar passed away in Delhi.
His funeral in Bombay, the funeral procession, was the biggest one India has ever known.
Let us leave aside slogans. Let us leave aside words which frighten people. Let us even make concession to the prejudices of our opponents. Bring them in so that they may willingly join with us on marching upon that road, which, as I said, if we walk long enough, must necessarily lead us to unity.
Dr. Ambedkar left a legacy of social transformation to help the world's dispossessed.
Dr. Ambedkar's life was very much dedicated to the untouchable, to the poor, and I think that is tremendous because in Buddhism, the first of the Four Noble Truths is the truth of suffering. And his life, his work is really exemplary because I feel he is the first socially engaged Buddhist, although that word was not known during his time, because he was the one who feels that Buddhism and politics must go together.
He was the product of his time to a great extent, and well, those times have changed. So I don't think we'll see another Ambedkar any more than we'll see another Gandhi or another Nehru. Though he was a man of his times, one could also say that in a way he did tower above his times. He had a very broad vision for India and for his own people.